Now, in the wake of those tariffs on China, Trump has suggested the European Union could be his next target. The EU now scrambling to avoid a trade war with the United States. But the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has said today Brussels is ready for tough negotiations.
We also recognise potential challenges in the relationship with the United States, and we are ready for that. When targeted, unfairly or arbitrarily, the European Union will respond firmly.
Well, with me now, our Europe editor, Armen Georgian. And Armen, look, tough talk there from Ursula von der Leyen. But is the European Union truly united on this issue of trade?
Well, the European Commission, Nadia, has responsibility to negotiate on behalf of the EU member states. So it's a united trade competence, as it's called. So the Commission can actually decide retaliatory measures if it came to that. But it is customary for the European Commission to work with the member states to find a political consensus. And this is indeed what happened in 2018. You might remember that back during Trump's first presidency, he imposed tariffs on European goods. Europe then agreed on a list of countermeasures to hit US products. So this was the subject of a consensus back in 2018. Would that still be reachable today? I think is kind of the big question, because the problem is you've got a very stagnant European economy, which actually stagnated at the end of last year. We now have official figures for that. We also got official figures for the German economy and how it finished its second straight year with shrinking output, and Germany is particularly vulnerable to any US tariffs on German cars. So even on the purely trade aspect, it might be hard to get everyone on the same page. But also politically, you've got some EU governments that are calling for a hard line, a robust collective EU response to Trump, like the French government or the Danish government. But then we saw Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, at Donald Trump's inauguration. She seems to be cultivating a relationship with him and with Elon Musk. So from many different viewpoints, it might be difficult to have that united position.
And look, if this does come, Armen, to a trade war between the EU and the United States, what kind of impact are we talking about here in Europe?
Well, this is often described as a lose-lose scenario for consumers on both sides of the Atlantic. We spoke to recently to the French foreign minister about this very issue, and I think he explained it quite well. Let's take a listen now to Jean-Noël Barrot.
You're right to highlight the fact that the EU is the #1 trade partner of the United States. That is why it would be a major miscalculation for the US to slap tariffs on Europe in a massive and indiscriminate way. It would heavily penalize numerous American companies which are active in France and in Europe.
So that's on the sort of consumer side of things. But in terms of the big sort of world politics picture, Nadia, if we do see this trade war, it means, crucially, that the US and the EU, these historical allies, are not working together to counter China. This is why the EU's top diplomat said earlier this week, in a trade war, it's only China that would be laughing from the sidelines. So that is something that people in Brussels are very aware of. One senior source of mine in the EU said a few days ago, the EU absolutely has to now offer Donald Trump a deal where it offers to work together with the US administration to counter China. That should be the EU's sort of pitching point, he was telling me. The trouble with that is, of course, first, the EU and the US would have to sort out these trade problems between themselves. One way of doing that that's been suggested is that the EU could buy more liquefied natural gas from America, LNG. But, for example, I was talking to an MEP the other day in the European Parliament who was saying, well, how does it make sense at a time when the EU is trying to be more energy independent, right? It's trying to divest itself from Russian energy. Why would it trade one dependence for another dependence? Why would it start relying more on American energy if it's trying to become energy independent? That doesn't make sense. So really, all round, no obvious answers to any of these questions.